Hi, I'm Glenn Poole, CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. Welcome to session 2 of our webinar on working with men and boys in all their diversity. It's day 5 of Men's Health Connected, and throughout today, we're looking at work with different communities of men. This next session is dedicated to work with men from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And we have 3 fantastic presenters to share some of their work with us. Coming up later, we have Sidique Bar, who has been running the council, the Multicultural Men's Group of South Australia. We've got Kudzai Nyamande, who is chair of the Nokuntenda, I knew this was going to happen, Nokuntenda Disability Foundation. And first, to kick us off, we have Dr. Michael Hay, who is Policy and Project Officer of FECCA. And if you don't know, FECCA is a national peak body, and it stands for the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils of Australia. A real privilege to have you here with us today, Dr. Michael. Over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for having me. As Glenn said, my name is Michael, and I work in the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia. The FECCA is a national peak body for representing Australians from different culturally, ethnically, and linguistically diverse Australians for the last 42 years. And we recently advised Australian government. We have this culturally and linguistically diverse COVID vaccine, all this around the COVID-19 advisory group. So we did a lot of work for the government. We also did also work about aged care. So we currently have 2 fundings from Department of Home Affairs and also Department of Health. So really privileged to have here. And I'd like to start by I'm from Ngunnawal land in Canberra. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the traditional custodian of Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respect to any participants who may be attending this meeting from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm probably the first culturally and linguistically diverse man present in this highly respected summit related to men's health. And I just want to show my gratitude before I start. And the structure of my presentation will be very brief. I have 20 minutes. So the 20 minutes we're focusing on 3 sections. The first one is some issues related to cowed men, that from my point of view, just for your consideration. The second point would be the observations. So what did I see within my experience, or the person I interviewed over the last 6 years, with their interview, and then some of the thoughts moving forward. So as you can see statistically, if we're using country of birth as an indicator, you can see Australia is a very multicultural country. We excluding people born in mainly English-speaking countries. That means people from England, from Canada or from USA will not be, because they speak English. So if we excluding that, you can see at least in New South Wales over 36% speak a language other English born overseas. In Victoria is 30. In Queensland is almost 15. And together about over 30% of people nationally, they are born overseas. From the 2016 census. We have a new census coming this year. So I reckon the percentage gonna increase. That demonstrates that we are very inclusive, diverse country by population. Yeah. But to start with, I want to share with the audience and the panel that in Australia there are notable gaps in the literature about prevalence, trends, issues, and effective men's health service provision for cowed men. So for example, we don't have data. I learned a lot from Glenn's presentation and about the percentage of suicides. But for culturally and linguistically diverse men, we don't have a very reliable, consistent data. We have a issue paper said if we don't count it, it doesn't count. Because you don't count it, you don't know. If you don't, because you don't measure them, it's hard to manage. It's hard to design, develop, and deliver a program, a project that has this specific target effectiveness. So that's I want to start with. We don't have the data at this stage to have an entire picture of the cowed man in Australia. And some of my other observations is in terms of health awareness and attitude within my research. I mean, this is just for me. I just want to point out the cowed man is not a homogeneous group. People, what I said here, Kudzai or Sidique may have a different view. Like I'm originally from a small village in China, like far away. So I can only speak from my part. So it's a non-homogeneous. But my observation and literature review shows cowed man goes to see doctor less frequently, and they often say I'm good. And if they have health concerns, they normally don't explicitly say. This is related to the hegemony of manhood or as a breadwinner of the family. So if they have some concerns, we just sucked up, because we don't want to show our weakness. Especially you are a father, you are looking, you are raising kids. You have lots of responsibilities in your life. So in most cases, you just sucked up. But when you go to see a doctor, often you already, in terms of cancer, is already in an advanced stage. That very typical for cowed men. And also lots of barriers in terms of the system, the mainstream system. So I list only a few. So actually a lot, like language barriers. So when I work in the government, I was responsible to providing free and credentialed interpreter services to all the patients in the public hospital. But there's a huge shortage of interpreters, and also people don't have that awareness to see a doctor because of language barriers. They often ask their family members, but in some critical situation, it's just very difficult for family members without a proper interpreter license to interpret for them. So that causes lots of issues for men. And also like stigma. Stigma has many different forms, shapes, but the stigma related to men can be reflected to, shame or, lots of, a kind of weakness, and people say if you have mental health, you don't want to go because people say you probably be, you must be done something bad within your family, like kind of this superstitious understanding of the discourse or narrative. So, and also racism. So in terms of, we often say Australia is working hard. It's a very great inclusive country, but different people have different view. I mean, sometimes we did encounter lots of racism. Some of them are informal racism. Some of them are institutional racism. And the COVID-19 definitely reinforced that. My research show the COVID-19 had definitely be a catalyst that lots of hatred spread. In America, there's this, Asian, was often violently beaten in public. And also in Australia, we often saw lots of stories, which it's the ugly truth, but racism do exist in Australia. And also Medicare ineligibility. So lots of people, so in FECCA, we support a lot from people from different backgrounds, people, asylum seekers, refugees. Often they don't have a eligibility, And I know the budget from the 11th May this year also said the new permanent resident will wait 4 years to have this eligibility. I mean, previously it's only 2 years. I mean that was saving the government billions of dollars. But the problem is, it really tarnish Australia's value as inclusive, as a multicultural, humanitarian, sponsor, nationally. I don't think it's good for the government. It's maybe politically correct, but it's not. So we are fighting hard to ask the government to modify, to change that proposal. We don't think it represents the core value of Australia. Because of their Medicare not eligible, so lots of things they couldn't do, and for cattlemen, and other things related to social, financial, and psychological difficulties. And because of limited time, I'll talk to them more. If I go past the limit of time, Glenn, can you kindly remind me, and I will make it short. Thank you. So my next slide talks a lot. I know men's health, this summit spent 1 day focusing on men's health. So I don't want to, like old saying, like sending my how to make a table in front of carpenter, because we have so many expertise already here. So I don't want to say that. I just want to touch upon there's a need to increase the awareness of mental health problems and help seeking for unmarried, for unemployed men from non-English speaking backgrounds. So they're single, they're unemployed, and they don't speak English well. So this is all problems comes to one. And I understand Glenn mentioned a lot about overlapping, about intersectionality. So sometimes worse came to worse. You are not only men, but you're also culturally and linguistically diverse, and you are also LGBTIQ, and you are also from refugee background. And then you have little understanding of the health literacy, and now you are in Australia. So it's very difficult for you to cope with that difficulties. And without a navigator-friendly health system, it's just very hard. And then you have your family, you have your little kids, and so that will definitely increase. We're talking about suicides of older men, but the suicidality in this case is also high chance. So we don't want to say that, but this all of the factors, the determinants, the social determinants that could generate the inclination to go to worse outcomes. And also men, because of the manhood or hegemonic masculinity, they often be very silent about their mental health issues. So in FECCA, I work a lot with people from Sri Lanka, from Sudan, from South, lots of other countries, and we have regular consultation. So within my knowledge, I see lots of like I have friends from Sri Lanka. I mean, this is not personal. I just want to say in that they don't in their dictionary they don't have a word called mental health. They have a word called a possession by devil. So like in the village I came from originally, we don't have no one talk about mental health. If you have problems with your mentality, often we will do a ceremony or ritual, like a dance with using fire with the devil. So like more like a very, for me, it's very horrifying seeing. And when I came to Australia, I learned so much difference about science, but it's true in some other culture. And because of remote, rural, and regional, that rurality, regionality, and also remoteness negatively reinforced that disconnection with the outside world, and that can compound the gravity, the severity of the situation. And the 4B section, I'm talking about, I just want to, because you guys are very subject experts in the mainstream studies, I want to mention about the suicides from the cowed man background. So lots of the suicides in the cowed man are called it egoistic suicide or anomic suicide. So it's different. So egoistic suicide is a type of suicide that men feel disconnected by the world, so they don't feel the meaningfulness of living, so they commit suicide to say goodbye to the world forever. So this, especially in the heavily transitioning society, men lost their sense of belonging. So they have this divorce, the kids are leaving them, and they don't feel that the life is worthwhile. So this kind of attempts to commit suicide, I call it egoistic suicide. Apologies for the term. Just ignore. I used to be academic, but I'm no longer academic. So this is just a term for some to pitch some funding, but just ignore them. And anomic suicide is another type of suicide that the whole society is like very unfair. People don't feel the meaning, so they don't feel the society has that nurturing attitude upon them. So they commit suicide. It's called anomic suicide. And then the suicide rates among 30 to 49 years old men are relatively high from cultural and linguistic diverse background. So if you are migrant, if you migrate to Australia before 30, you are young, you are energetic, you're full of, future. So you have less mental health concerns. But if you are over 40, if you are over 40, you probably already settled down. So you have kids, you have this something, that make you feel you don't live for yourself, you live for your kids. But between 30 and 49, it's a crucial age, a bracket that you are looking for marriage, looking for settle down. There's so much uncertainty in your life because that unpredictability, uncertainty, the suicide rate is relatively high. And also men exposed to greater intolerance, violence, and discrimination in the host country. It is a widely known fact that for men, it's very difficult to blend into the mainstream society. I mean, no offense to any participants who are here who are women. For women, sometimes it's relatively easier because of the gender. You can observe in America, it's very difficult, it's relatively easier for Asian women to settle down with a white man. But for men, for colored men to find a mainstream woman, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because of the gender stereotyping and also related to the understanding. So there's a study on that. And in terms of loneliness, I know Dave mentioned loneliness in the previous presentation. So loneliness, depression, and anxiety is very common for colored men. So I can see that on average, like 1 in 8 men. So I don't want to bother you with the statistics. You can always find this factual information by simple Googling. But what I want to point out is that because of men's ethnicity and this cultural and this 1 in 7 Australians reported experiencing discrimination because of their cultural ethnicity, and this can cause their distress, depression, and anxiety, and these are the key, symptoms of the mental health. So that's a huge issue. And also in terms of injuries, I want to point out, colored men experience significantly more work-related injuries than non-migrant men workers. So statistics show by the WHO research report. So migrant men, lots of migrant men are working in building and construction, restaurant, industry when they first came to Australia. So because of this lack of proper workplace health and safety, protection, they injure themselves more. Like in my experience in Canberra, I'm from Canberra, so you see the Canberra, the construction is booming, but you see lots of construction. Before I give this presentation, I just drive around, I walk around, I see all this new construction. You see lots of migrant men, so they do landscaping, fencing, roofing, and joining, and all of this work and painting. So, but I didn't see some of them even don't have a proper PPE because of the language barriers. Sometimes and they're also involved in cash economy. So they're not properly trained, and that can cause a lot of injuries for them statistically for migrant men. And also gambling. So I want to mention out culturally and linguistically diverse background people. The gambling is also a very serious issue. Sorry, I apologize for my noise. I think someone is renovating the whole building. Due to a range of triggers associated with migration, people from migrant and refugee background, they gamble more, and lots of them are problem gamblers, are not low risk or moderate risk gamblers. They are problem gamblers. So that causes huge issue. We know gambling is a serious issue in this country, and it's also legal. Like from my experience, in rural China or in China, gambling is illegal. It's not legal. Because it's not legal, so everyone gambles. I mean, it might be exaggeration, but when I came to Australia, I realized gamble is legal in Australia. So I just feel, oh, probably this is a liberal democracy. You have every right to spend your own money. But for me, it's a cultural shock. So because gamble is not legal in Australia. Sorry, in my home country of origin. Yeah. So gamble is also very common for cowed men. Yeah. And also homelessness is also a serious issue. We talk a lot about women's homelessness. I just want to point out, according to the 2016 census, there are still 20,184 men who counted in the census on the night of the 2016 as being homeless. This number might be growing. And the current federal budget hasn't put a lot on housing. I think is a huge disappointment that housing was not considered proportionately. And my final slide, thank you for listening. My final slide, moving forward, I want to say the policymakers and service providers in the main area, especially for culturally and linguistically diverse background, has a long way to go before they provide equitable, culturally appropriate, and even respectful service to culturally and linguistically diverse men. Sometimes I don't want to say CALD because I think this acronym is a little bit, it's not, I don't like this CALD. So, but often I would say, I know the government documents use CALD, but I don't think CALD is a misnomer, it's not proper. But I want to point out, for communication purpose, we have a long way to go. And before I finish, I want to say there's a lot of research talking about migrant men. When they come to a host country, there's a huge understanding about manhood or masculinity. Some men lost their manhood because it's difficult for them to find a job that matches their skills. I saw professors who migrated to Australia. They began working as a kitchen hand in restaurants. I saw professors in physics, because they don't speak English well, they become an Uber driver. I'm not saying Uber driver is not good. What I'm saying is a mismatch. When the professor become an Uber driver as a full-time, and then they become breadwinner for the family. Often their wife, they don't have a job. So they lost their source of income. And in this case, their manhood, they feel that their manhood was destroyed or was dismantled because they couldn't financially support their family. And people could argue that because of migration, there's increasing egalitarian of gender, because men realized we should be equal footing, about breadwinner. So, if you say, if in my family, if my wife earns more than I earn, I will feel, I feel like I used to earn more than you, but now you earn more than me. I feel like I used to be the backbone of the family. By the way, my wife doesn't work, so that doesn't apply to me. But I just want to say there's a change of the manhood, and the hegemony of masculinity also need to rethink because of this dynamics, and it's a good chance for men to learn. And I want to say that once more time, it's always to learn new things, to be open-minded. For all the CALD men, I encourage you to learn, to have open-minded way of thinking and to embrace our great country in Australia. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. You've covered so much information there, and at the same time, you've only just scratched the surface. You've covered mental health and injuries and all those areas where culturally and linguistically diverse men are experiencing worse outcomes on average. You've talked about access to services. You've talked on from many different angles of the racism and discrimination and stigma experience. I've got like 1 minute to ask you a question. I don't know what to ask. I think one thing I want to ask is this, because I've never met a man who said to me, "Hello, I'm John. I'm a cold man." No one identifies as a cold man. I struggle to cope with the Australian Men's Health Forum with the complexity of all of men's lives. How do we make sense of the fact that there are dozens, maybe hundreds of culturally and linguistically diverse communities? How do we get all those different communities on the radar when there's so many of them?
Oh, thank you, Glenn. So my advice is work with us, work with FECCA. Okay. It's a huge pleasure that we can work in together. It's to raise people's awareness. I saw lots of comments in the chat section, like Mick talking about. So, but in response to the question, we have to count them. As I said, if you don't count it, it doesn't count, right? Yeah. And if we count them, we should count them properly. Like you have to do like country of birth, speaking language other English, or your ethnicity. So sometimes people born in India, but was brought up and educated in England, and then come to Australia. They speak perfect English, but they're not cowed. They don't say I'm not cowed. I speak English better than you. But if you born in you still born in England, or still born in India, but you come to Australia very late. So I learned to speak English when I was 25. So I don't know how to properly speak English. So when I was 25, I learned to speak English. It's very difficult for me. So I'm in this case, I'm definitely a coward because I speak English. I speak a language other English at home for most of the time. So, but speaking my country of birth, in this case, apply. Sometimes even I born, country of birth is misleading because sometimes even people born in a non-English speaking country, they are brought up or trained in a main English speaking country like England and Canada. They don't count as a coward, but they're not cowed, but statistically they are cowed. So I want to increase the indicators of the data. So we're working with ABS and also the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. We ask them to improve the data to capture the authenticity of the cow, and we do that report. So this is a very broad area. So Glenn, you're asking me a great question. So I'm happy to working with you on that. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Yeah, what I'm taking from that I can get a handle on right now is we need the data. So we need to keep advocating for good data over and over again, but also clearly we need representation. So we need advocates like you who are in as many rooms as possible, waving the flag for culturally and linguistically diverse men. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I just hope this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Glenn. Thank you all.
Well, you're very welcome. So moving on now from that excellent presentation, we're going to come to Kudzai Nyamande. Kudzai has worked in mental health for around 20 years. He started in the UK and then moved to Australia in 2012, picking up on the point that you were making there, Michael. Kudzai is the chairperson of Nokuntenda Disability Foundation, Inc., which is a registered NGO in both South Australia and Zimbabwe. In South Australia, the organisation runs a 24/7 crisis line which is staffed by credentialed mental health professionals, and it specifically targets cold populations. The organisation also runs men's groups and youth groups for cold populations, and Kudzai is currently studying for a PhD in African and Indigenous population, where he's looking at the issue of stigma. Lots to share, Kudzai. You're very welcome to be here, and the stage is yours, my friend.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, as Glenn has kind of identified, I don't have not much to add, but what I'm going to talk today about is regarding I've been listening to a lot of sessions that have been going on over the week, and I'm not going to go back again on the issue of what a lot of speakers have spoken about the reluctance of men to access services and the reason to that. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and talk about that again. I'm going to talk about something different. So I would want to educate people about the reasons, maybe why African men, in particular, I'll be referring to African men because I think Michael has covered the Asian element, which has got a lot of similarities with the African. The perception of illness in the Western world is, people suffer from illness through viruses, through bacteria, through lifestyle factors. So that's a kind of the perception of illness. In Africa, there's a different perception of illness. So, you can, growing up in Africa, people, they accept, general things like flu and injuries, they will kind of really go to a clinic. But the African people will struggle with chronic illnesses like mental illness and stroke. They believe that in witchcraft, they believe that maybe their fellow families are bewitching them. There is a lot of beliefs in superstition. There is a lot of beliefs in rituals. So the chronic illness part is a struggle for most African people. And there's a saying that you can't hit a target that you can't see. So, for services to kind of give very good kind of services to African people, they need to understand this element. Like mental illness, in Africa, I know Michael touched about the lack of definition of mental illness. In an African context, if you're not living on the street with dirty clothes, eating food from the rubbish, then you're not mentally ill. The concept of depression is not identified. People say that you need to have time to get depressed. When can you get time to get depressed? You should be looking after the kids. You should be going to work. You should be trying to get food on the table. So the acceptance of depression is not really accepted in an African context. So, but the concern now is that most of the people here who are resident in Australia, who are from African beliefs, from African background, they still have these beliefs, and they are carrying on these beliefs. I'll give you an example of, there was a man who I know, and the son was having some panic symptoms, panic anxiety. He was having a lot of clear symptoms of anxiety and depression. But the father couldn't accept that. So the father ended up booking a plane to go to some place in Africa. And then the son spent almost 6 to 9 months, with this old man who is a witch doctor, and God knows what concussions the son was getting. And so, even this man who is an engineer by profession, who is educated, who has been in Australia for 20 years, is still holding on to those beliefs, and is going to the extent of taking his son from school to go to Africa because he can't accept the concept of mental illness. So that's the concept that we are getting into. In an African context, there isn't much talk about, for strokes, people don't understand the word stroke. You hear people saying, oh, there was some birds which came and which hit the man and his mouth went on the side, and there was this, it's all kind of related to superstition. So there is that need for education in those mainly chronic illnesses like mental illness and strokes, even in an Australian context. So in a Western context here, when you're unwell, You go to a GP, you go to the hospital or clinic, you go for tests like CT scan and ultrasound. But in an African context, there is nothing like that. There is no, there's no, it's, in a row, like I come from Zimbabwe, which is mainly 80% of the people live in rural areas and just 20% live in the cities. For that 80% of people, they don't have access to a clinic, and maybe they can't afford to have a GP. There is maybe a ratio of 1 doctor to about 1 million people. So they don't, telling them about tests, like blood tests, and investigation, they don't believe in that. And they will try to find someone to blame. So chronic illnesses like mental illness and, strokes, and there's always someone to blame, a member of the family who is bewitching. There is a friend who is jealousy about the achievement of a family. So it's always kind of related to that. And it's carrying over to Australia because people are still having those beliefs. So even, in Australia, I did a session a couple of weeks ago at one of the, I was working with young people from the age of 18 to 20. And I was particularly struck by this young lady. The father is a psychiatrist and the mother is a nurse. And this young lady was having a lot of depressive symptoms, poor eating, lack of sleep, and kind of struggling at university, and approached the father with those symptoms. And she said she wanted to maybe see a psychologist. And the father told her straight, no one is going to a psychologist here. We don't want to hear about that here. There is nothing called like mental illness here. So the daughter was prevented from seeing a psychologist by someone who is a psychiatrist, who works day in and day out with people with mental illness, who knows what happens, who has been educated, who has got insight, but was preventing this the own daughter to access services. So the daughter had to be sneaky. So she's now seeing a psychologist, but she's lying. So she kind of lies to the parent that she's going to see a friend when she's actually seeing a psychologist. So we have these challenges that the African code people are facing in Australia, and it's affecting us, leading to more, suicide. And because instead of focusing on issues like health, lifestyle, like exercise and healthy food, instead of focusing on, the issues of alcohol, there is a lot of alcohol usage in our population. There is a lot of, high blood pressure related to having unhealthy food, too much salt, smoking and eating fatty food. But instead of educating people, educating our families on the importance of this health lifestyle and the diet intake, the conversation will be centering maybe around witchcraft and about people who are so jealousy and other things that doesn't help. So it's talking from my own context, having grown up in Africa, I don't remember a time when I sat with my parents and they told us about health, eating, or lifestyle. For me, it was mainly about, you need to be careful when you go to a party, who gives you food, because someone might put poison in your food. You don't visit this certain uncle who's into superstition. You don't go and see this aunt who has got this, so it was mainly around that. And the sad part of it is it's carrying over to Australia. As Glenn has said, I'm doing a PhD in mental health, and I'm kind of shocked at the extent of the beliefs that I thought maybe by now they would have been, being in Australia for years, but it's kind of, you are living in Africa while you are living in Australia. So the influences of the past experience growing up in Africa is still hamstringing men and still kind of in the way of good health outcomes and good health. And there's been also this portrayal of African men as a macho, is strong physically, and I always tell, during the young men's meeting that some of these characteristics of men that most African men will relate to are not supported by evidence. Because if you look at the suicide rate in African population, 90% of it is men. It's actually rare to hear a woman being having suicided, and South Australia here, and Western Australia, which has got quite a high rate of suicide in African men. It's all predominantly men. So I always educate them that this portrayal that you have been used to, you have been told that it is not supported by evidence. Actually, African men and the youth are actually weak if we are looking at in the context of suicide and mental illness because of the high rates in those population. So I know yesterday someone spoke about suicide as a silent killer. And I was listening and I took quite a lot from that session. And like with all this suicide that kind of becoming endemic in African population, during the discussions, like at the funeral, there is rarely a mention that someone suicided. It's related to other things. Oh, he had cancer, or he had a kidney failure, and the actual facts on the ground is that the person suicided. So unless it's maybe on the news, or it's been it's something that has been publicly identified in the newspapers, or or something like that. If it happens in the home or somewhere private, you won't be told that it was suicide. Yeah, it will be related to something else. So it brings about the challenges in getting those statistics, of suicide because of the fact that it's being downplayed. Because the issue with suicide is that if the other community members hear about that, it's kind of a stigma. The other community members might start to shy from them, and it might lead to a loss of pride, to a loss, losing friends and other, so people will try to protect that. And I know we have spoken about a lot of said things, like we're talking about suicide, but there is also some positive things that we have seen through our working here. We've noticed that African men, they like sport, they like soccer. Soccer is a good medium. Like if you arrange a soccer tournament, most African men will come there, and then there will be barbecues, and then they'll participate, and then maybe after having a few drinks, having alcohol, they'll start to disclose the kind of challenges that they are having. When I was telling people about this presentation I was going to do, I received a call from a friend who said, I want you to address the issue of women during your presentation. And I said, what do you mean? I said, we are having struggles in relationship. And also, I know I'm limited by time, so I was trying to be a bit short. The African man was always struggling with the erosion of his status, because when he was in Africa, he was at the top of the hierarchy. Every decision had to go through him. He had the higher paying job. Most women in Africa, their salary is just to play their hair. It's enough to play their hair and do some small things, but most of the funding, most of the finances will be coming from the men's salary. But what we've noticed that is when people migrate to Australia, nursing, which doesn't pay well in Africa, starts to becoming paying more than maybe an engineer, maybe someone who was working as a motor mechanic. So there's then that, the man who was using maybe his financial muscle to kind of make decisions is now at almost equal footing, or maybe at less salary to the woman. And that's kind of creating a lot of challenges. And we're having to tell people that, it's a global thing, it's happening everywhere, it's now about equal rights. And so I know the African man is struggling to come to terms with that, because of the fact that it's such a big change for them in a very short time, when they are having to grapple with, the trauma of leaving their family, in Africa, the trauma of, someone spoke about the discrimination. And then on top of that, someone who was silent before now becoming vocal, and maybe a bit more maybe has got the financial muscle to make those decisions. So I think as of time, I will kind of stop on that, and I don't know if anyone has got questions.
Thanks, Kudzai. You've done a really great job of giving an insight into the experiences of African men in Australia in just 20 minutes. Well done. I'm just reflecting from my own perspective of being, born in England and living in Australia. A couple of things come up for me. Just how small the African community, or not spread out across Australia, the African community is compared to the UK. And I live in Queensland, and I rarely see or meet an African man, a man of African background. And then when I come to places like Adelaide and I meet an African man, back to Michael's point, often a doctor driving an Uber from the airport, it will be. It takes me by surprise, because of the lack of visibility of Africans in Australia, both at just an experiential level. In my day-to-day life, I don't see any African men in Queensland, but just more broadly in the culture, whether it's in sports teams or on our television screens, we don't see African men, African Australians well represented. So I think it's really great to have you here, and just give us that, even though it's only 20 minutes, it begins to give us an insight into what the communities are dealing with, and the men in the communities as well. Because the point I think you've both made, and this is my experience more from back in the UK, is that often men in those minority communities are overlooked and forgotten about. It's assumed they're okay, and all the support is wrapped around the women, and the men are forgotten. So I'm hearing that similar story here, which is why it's important when we'll come to Sidique in a moment to talk about the importance of forming groups like the Multicultural Men's Group. I also want to talk about the soccer a little bit, because I think we've had a few talks over the years about how sport is a great vehicle. We complain about men not engaging with health and social services, but there are ways that men will engage, and sport is a fantastic vehicle for connecting men, particularly the international language of soccer. I'm going to end being a little bit racist, even though Australians can't really play soccer. It's great to see that Africans can, and I can just imagine in a few years' time, that's got to be one area of Australian life where African men start to become more visible, because African soccer is doing really well compared to Australian soccer, as far as I'm concerned. So it's good to see you using that universal language of sport to connect with men in informal ways and bring them together. I want to just see, actually, if there is anyone in the room, and anyone who's working with multicultural men in other parts of the country, particularly if they've got a question or want to share some of their experiences. I know we had Daniel here from Western Sydney as a multicultural health officer. I don't know if Daniel has any comments or questions or comments.
Hello, Glenn and everyone. Thank you for the presentation, Michael and Kudzai. So that's really insight. And just to comment what you have said already is I could see from my own experience as well, because I've been in the sector for a while, and my engagement is around young people from multicultural background, and I'm from a South Sudan background as well. So when you talk about Kudzai, about the society, I could see, and given the data from Melbourne and the news and all media thing, you could see this underrepresentation in terms of those issues. And also the other factor we could factor in, like, let's say, the interaction of juvenile, or let's say youth justice in terms of mental health, and society also is another factor thing that we could consider, and also employment, education. So there's so many factors that could interact with mental health and society with a lot of young people that we could also consider. So well done for that.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. And I also noticed Peng had left some comments. I don't know if Peng is in the is still here and wants to share or comment. Not sure if Peng can hear me. If you want to drop a comment in, Peng, just unmute. And then just to the room in general, if anyone has a comment or question for Kudzai before we move on. Okay, no one's jumping in. You've obviously covered everything they need to know in your 20 minutes, Kudzai.
Thank you.
Great work. And just the beginning, again, as with Michael, just really the beginnings of a conversation. We really need to start creating more space and more opportunities to just hear men's voices from the many different culturally and linguistically diverse communities. You know, I know you alone can't cover all Africans' men's experience, let alone all culturally linguistically diverse men's experience, let alone all Zimbabwean men's experience, you know, right? Yeah. But you've done a great job of giving us as an insight. Always thought-provoking, and I hope just the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it. Thanks for your time, Kudzai.
All right, you're welcome.
So we'll move on to our final speaker for this session, Sidique Bar. Sidique's originally from Sierra Leone in West Africa, and he arrived in Australia in 2001 as a refugee under the UNHCR refugee program. Sidique studied multimedia at the University of Adelaide and has since held roles in both state and federal government offices. Currently, Sidique is the Transport and Communication Officer at the Multicultural Communities Council of South Australia, dealing with media and communication related issues. He also helps coordinate the MCCSA's Multicultural Men's Group of South Australia, which because of COVID, I couldn't get to the launch to, but I think I joined you virtually. I wish I had been there. I got the invite, unfortunately couldn't cross the border. But Sidique, we've been in communication a few times over the last couple of years. It's great to have you here and speaking and sharing from your experience. You're very welcome.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us on such an important discussion for men. Before going further, first, I would like to pay my respect to the Ghana people who are the original custodians of the land that I'm speaking from. I pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. I also like to thank the Australian Men's Health Forum for organizing these events. Men's health, by definition, means a state of complete physical, mental, and well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. Someone can look healthy, but they might still have some other issues. As a man from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, called, which I'll be using a lot of times today, I should say I'm excited to be here to talk about the multicultural men's group we formed in South Australia for the sole purpose of supporting men from diverse backgrounds. I also like to state that my talk today is based on my perspective and experience living in South Australia for over 20 years. I'm not talking as an expert, neither am I representing all South Australian men from multicultural background. I'll be talking just based on my own perspective, based on my own experience. My interest in men's groups started way back in my early years in Australia. As an active member back then in the Sierra Leone community, we decided that the Sierra Leone community of South Australia need to form a support group for men from our community to help us with our resettlement challenges. So we named our group Kabudu, which sort of just means a particular group of men. You know, it was just for us to meet and talk and support each other and just try to learn from each other, because after being at home, if you've been home for like 2 weeks or so, sometimes it's good to just go and meet with the guys, catch up, have a chat, and try to wind down a bit from all the stress that we get from work. You know, so the group really worked with service providers back then. We organized information sessions on relevant issues such as education, mental health, legal matters, employment, income support, accommodation. And we also try to promote cultural and sporting events for our members. So that was the small group that I was part of. So when I started working at MCCSA, my role there actually, which the MCCSA is the Multicultural Communities Council of South Australia, and I'll be using that word as well for a while. So just so that you be aware that whenever I say MCCSA, I'm referring to the Multicultural Communities Council of South Australia. Yeah, my role there actually is the Transport and Communications Officer. And I wasn't doing much, and I wasn't working much like in any program per se, like working with migrants or anything like that. And my work is more around transport and also communications. I update our websites and do things more around communications. I write media releases and that sort of thing. But during our staff meetings, whenever ideas are floated around, like for us to make suggestions, I always raise the issue of supporting men, like because most of the programs, they just talk about what we can do for refugees or migrants, and there are programs to support women, but there is not much interest shown around doing programs for men. So I always keep telling them, look, we need to have like a program that supports men as well. Because being in my community and very exposed as well to other African migrants as well, I know that men are going through a lot. And as I stated before, men's health is not merely the absence of disease. You can see someone walking around physically fit, but they might have issues going on in their lives. So I keep pushing for the organization, which is the MCCSA, to do some programs around supporting men. And finally, they asked me to host a men's health forum at MCCSA. Men's Health Week was coming, and they said, well, Sidique, you always talk about men's, like having a group for men's, organize a health forum for men during Men's Health Week. So through my networks, I contacted few men that I know from different cultural backgrounds to join me to organize these events. After hosting the Men's Health Forum, two things stood out. One, the turnout was great. Our hall at MCCSA was at capacity. And secondly, there was a unanimous appeal for more of such events. And what I learned from that session was that there is a need for some space of some sort that men from various backgrounds can meet and talk about the challenges they are facing in their Australian journey. Because you see, I believe that men from all over the world are faced with similar challenges in relation to family issues. These challenges may vary from place to place based on culture and societal norms. And like taking myself as an example and being one of the first humanitarian entrants to Adelaide from Sierra Leone and actively involved in like community family dramas or conflicts, for a better choice of word, I've been involved in countless number of cases involving family disputes within my community and others in the African community as well, because I know people from different communities as well. Migrant men or men from refugee background are faced with similar problems. And the most common challenge is trying to keep the family together. In most cases, there is a sense of breakdown in communication. There are financial problems. poor understanding of the new system we find ourselves in, and loss of identity as well. This has led to hostile divorces, where separation within families can be very challenging and people are really going through bad divorces. And we also have fostered children, like people have their children taken away from them. And we have men as well being imprisoned as well due to domestic violence. And we have some men even being returned to their countries, of origin. They've been sent back. So what I've observed during this time in my own experience over the past 20 years is that most of these problems, I've just identified 4 issues here that I'll just talk on briefly because of time as well. Breakdown in communication is one, and I use that because when people come to this country, mostly you find yourself being challenged in the sense that you now have to adapt to a new system. And people from my own country as well, from our background, there used to be what we call the unspoken rule of engagement. Back home, between the husband and the wife, really, everyone knows their role. So here we find ourselves having to deal with you need to sit down and have a chat with your wife, you need to have a chat with your kids. Whereas in Africa, sort of everyone knows where they stand. As a man, you know what's expected of you. You try to you try to do what you're meant to do, but your wife don't question you. You don't get questioned. But over here, you are questioned because you have to deal in it's like an equal setting where everybody have to make their own point. And this affects men trying to adjust in a new society and at the same time having to deal with their family, having to deal with their children who now comes home from school, asking them questions and trying to challenge what they think should be done around the house or how they should go about their daily lives. So men feel challenged by that. And the other thing as well is finance, money. Money is a big issue. For most of our brothers, of our men colleagues that are here, as some of the other speakers have talked about as well before, people feel really, really challenged and feel inadequate as well. Because back home, the man is the breadwinner. And when you come to this country now, you have to find, you and your wife, both, most times you are working. And even if both of you are working, the expectation is for you to be on top. You need to be looking after your family. But now you feel like that's been taken away from you. So that's sort of lead to frustration for some of the men. And another thing as well is poor understanding of the new system in which we find ourselves in. When people come to this country, they find themselves in a whole different situation where they have to look out for themselves. And the support, even though the government try to provide support, I would like to say that the support is not that strong enough to help men navigate the system that they find themselves in. And in this system here, ignorance of the law can't be an excuse when it comes to family matters. And people are challenged in that area. And they sometimes find it difficult to understand what they need to do to look after themselves and look after their family. And this now sometimes as well can lead to loss of identity, or it's another point as well that I will just talk about briefly, that when people migrate to this country, somehow they feel like it's very hard to relate to the new system they find themselves in. Because back where they came from, they used to do things in a different way. But now they find themselves in a society where they have to change their ways. And maybe for somebody who comes here at a younger age, you can say, okay, you need to adapt. It's very easy. But for somebody who comes here as an adult, it's not just easy to switch off what you've known, the way you've been doing things, and just automatically go in with the new system that you find yourself in. So if there is not much structure in place for men to learn and grow, it is very challenging. So even though men can face the same challenge. It doesn't matter whether you are from a cult background or not. I just believe that men from cult background are really challenged when they try to settle into this new system. So when we held the Men's Health Forum back then for the MTCSA, which I was asked to do, the main issue really was for us to talk about men's health and encourage men to undergo, do their regular health checks. But after the forum, and when we asked people to ask questions, what we find out was most of the questions were not even around the men's health. People, even though they listened and they understood what was being said by the presenter, who was talking about how to eat well and what we need to do to stay healthy, the questions were all around parenting. People started asking about, they move on, they didn't bother talking much about what the focus of the topic was. They started asking about parenting, about the problems they are having with their kids. If they explain to their kids what they should do or how they should eat, the kids are coming to them with all these questions, things they are learning from school, and they don't know what to do. So we realized that, so for me, I thought, well, there is a need for more of these sessions, and there is a need to bring men together just so that we can talk. So after the forum and the overwhelming requests for more sessions, I was asked to reach out to men from cult background and form a multicultural men group so that we can engage with these groups and just start to learn from each other. So I reached out to various men from the multicultural community here in South Australia, and one of them is Kudzai, who was our speaker, because I know he worked with Nokuntenda as well, and talked with other men as well that I know who are, I can say, stakeholders in this space. That's men that I know and I believe will contribute to something meaningful. So we came together, we formed the steering committee, and we put together a terms of reference and invited more men from our networks to join the group. And the group now is only being 2 years old, still a work in progress. But the main goal of the group is to provide advocacy and support while working with MCCSA and other service providers. We're also looking at the group to provide strategic directions and leaderships to help improve the health and socio-economic well-being of men from cult communities in South Australia. And we aim to achieve this by providing a safe space where men can feel welcome to meet and share their stories in confidence. And we want to encourage men to meet and talk as well in an informal setting. We want to organize, we try to organize catch-ups wherein it's not formal, because if you tell a man from a cult background mostly, let's go for a meeting to talk about, see how we can talk about domestic violence or talk about health issues, they might not be interested. But if you say, let's go and catch up for coffee, or let's just go catch up for a games night, or let's go catch up for a soccer, after soccer, we can have a bit of a talk around this or that issues, you find out you will get their interest. So the meetings we are organizing so far has been around, it's just very informal. We're not making it in any formal way, so people will feel comfortable to come around and meet and share their stories. And we are also looking at encouraging and supporting men from cult background to form social men's group for their respective communities. So men from the Burundian community, for instance, we want to encourage them to have their own small men's group, and the same goes for all the other different communities that we are working with. So this group will meet informally, and we will work with them and provide any sort of support we can for them, and link them with reputable service providers that are culturally sensitive to the needs of men from cult background. And we're also looking at hosting information sessions, events, and activities for men's group that will promote respectful behaviors whilst also normalizing discussions around mental well-being and DV-related issues so that we can break stigma, And before the COVID-19 outbreak, we used to meet at the MCCSA. However, we are affected by the COVID-19 outbreak as it happened right while we are about to get really active, but we still maintain contact via Zoom. Our group currently comprises men from different cultural backgrounds. We have like members from Chile, from Mexico, Sierra Leone, which I'm from Sierra Leone, from Zimbabwe. Kudzai is from Zimbabwe. We have members from Burundi, Cambodia, Somalia, Ivory Coast, mainstream Australians, Serbians, Italians. So it's growing. The group is growing, and we aim to grow its diversity. We want to learn from each other as men some of the challenges that we face. And we believe that if we engage with men as well from cult background who've been here much longer than us, it will be an opportunity for them to share their stories with us. Some of the challenges that we face, they can easily tell us, look, this is what we used to do, or this is how we used to handle these sort of issues. So currently, as we speak, we've also started a multicultural men's walk, which we do every month. So the last Saturday of every month, we will embark on an hour walk, which is mainly to meet, talk, and extend our network while doing some sort of exercise. This is also just an opportunity to meet, talk, and support each other. So the group is open to all South Australian men, and we hope the momentum will continue. And as time goes on, other multicultural men's group will be set up in other Australian cities. And as time goes on, we would like to see more groups, and we can connect. We might end up maybe one day having a national men's group as well, like a multicultural men's group. I know time is running out as well, so I would like to thank you all for listening, and hope you understand my accent as well, speaking from, I speak with an African accent, so maybe some people might find it hard to understand. And I look forward to your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Sidique. I understood every word, and to be honest, I'm an Englishman in Australia, and I find you easier to understand than I find some Australians because of some of the strange words that Australians have. So you did great, my friend.
Thank you.
As Mick says, lovely accent. Kudzai, good job, Sidique. And look, I mean, it's so interesting that on one hand, Michael and Kudzai and yourself as well share stories that it's really hard to relate to from a white perspective in a majority white country. I'm kind of culturally and linguistically diverse because I come from England, but the slight culture clash I feel is nothing compared to the experiences that you guys are showing. So in some ways, it feels like it's an entirely different experience. And then when you talk about the ways you engage with men, when you bring men together, and it's not the health they necessarily want to talk about, it's the families and the relationships and the role of being a man and the challenges of money and work and how sport brings them together to build connection, how you're creating the man walks. There's so many overlaps between the general men's health sector and what you guys are doing. It's we've said you're instinctively understanding that the way to engage men in their health is not necessarily through a very medical model where you're just doing talks about heart disease and nutrition, though these things are important. It's actually connecting and building relationships with men in a way that works for men. And the fact that you're taking on that challenge for so many different multicultural communities across South Australia is amazing, and you're already thinking about how you can expand and make it Australia wide. I'm so inspired by what you're up to, Michael. Really sorry that I've not been able to get down and connect with your group so far, but my promise to you is when I can next get over the border to South Australia, I'm coming with you on a walk. I'm coming with you to a group. I'm really excited if you'll let me come and spend some. As a culturally and linguistically diverse man myself, I'd love to come and spend time with you.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
Great. So look, we stick around for a few minutes while we say goodbye. I'm gonna close the session formally because we've gone past 12:30. If you've got a minute, just stick around and say goodbye. My final words are just firstly, a thank you to each of our three speakers who have done an amazing job of, in just 75 minutes, giving us an insight into the many different challenges faced by the many different culturally and linguistically diverse communities across Australia and the men and boys within them. Our speakers have been Dr. Michael Fay from FECCA, the Federation of, I need to read it out in front of me, the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils of Australia, Kudzai Nyamande of the Nokuntenda Disability Foundation, and just then Sidique of what's it stand for? It is the council, the
Multicultural Communities Council.
Thank you. The Multicultural Communities Council of South Australia. Yeah. Just so I don't have the final word, I posted in the comments, Sidique, that I was really inspired by your work and the work of your colleagues that you're doing to connect men from many different cultures across South Australia. Ross said, Kudzai, your talk was excellent. You've opened the door of his understanding much, much wider than it has been up until your presentation today. Thank you. And Michael, Bob said, superb presentation. Your articulation, observations and prescriptions for change are truly inspiring. It has been a really inspiring 75 minutes we spent with you. Thanks so much. And thanks for everyone here who's participated.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Yeah.